It was an ordinary morning on the farm, the sun peeking through the early mist, casting a warm glow over the fields. I had just finished my breakfast when I noticed something unusual in the distance. A convoy of construction vehicles rumbled down the drive, their engines growling like beasts on the prowl. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. They were headed straight for my property. This wasn't just any piece of land, it was my sanctuary, a place where I had poured my heart and soul into cultivating a small but thriving farm. Nestled away from suburban sprawl, it served not only as a home, but also as an escape from the chaos of daily life. Memories flooded back. Long days sowing seeds, evenings spent watching sunsets, and weekends filled with laughter during family gatherings. The farm represented years of hard work and dreams, now threatened by a bureaucratic entity I barely recognized. As I stepped outside to confront the unfolding scene, panic surged within me. The heavy machinery rolled onto my land with no regard for the abundant crops swaying gently in the breeze. Workers jumped from their machines, surveying their surroundings with a sense of purpose that seemed unnervingly misplaced. What gave them the right to invade my property like this? I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed the number for local authorities, hoping they could shed light on the situation that felt both surreal and unjust. Upon speaking with a sheriff's deputy who arrived shortly after, I learned that these actions were sanctioned by a homeowners association, HOA, claiming that my farm violated their bylaws, a claim that left me utterly bewildered. I didn't even belong to this HOA. How could they possibly assert authority over my land? The deputy conveyed that they were there to oversee the situation, but had no power to stop it. My words spilled out in frustration. How could anyone enforce rules that didn't even apply to me? I found myself in a verbal tussle with one of the foremen who was overseeing the operation. He explained that they had received complaints about nuisances emanating from my property, complaints fueled by neighbors who didn't understand or appreciate what it meant to nurture land. Apparently, someone had taken issue with my chickens roaming freely and perhaps even the unkempt nature of some flower beds. To me, they were not nuisances, they were signs of life and vitality. As I stood there watching machines tear through what had once been flourishing rows of plants, despair settled in like an unwelcome visitor. Each crunch of dirt beneath those bulldozers felt like a personal attack against everything I held dear. The farm represented more than just acreage. It was a living testament to everything I had envisioned for myself: sustainable living, harmony with nature, and a deep-rooted connection to food production. Rage bubbled within me as thoughts whirled. Who would fight for someone like me? Someone who wasn't part of any suburban enclave but still fell victim to its overreaching rules. The image of my farm being battered and bruised by cold machinery contrasted harshly with its vibrant essence, a paradox that left me breathless. As I watched those machines tear down portions of my sanctuary, anger shifted to determination. This battle was bigger than just an individual struggle. It highlighted issues inherent in HOA governance and regulations that often trampled personal freedoms underfoot while granting undue power to these small communities. Little did they know this struggle would awaken a fierce resolve within me, a resolve to fight back against unjust tyranny cloaked in bylaw. To understand the gravity of the situation unfolding on my farm, it's essential to grasp the role and function of homeowners associations, HOAs, in residential communities across the country. At their core, HOAs are formed to manage shared spaces and maintain a certain standard within neighborhoods, often aiming to enhance property values and ensure community aesthetics. This usually involves creating a set of rules or bylaws that residents are expected to follow. While many view HOAs as a way to foster community spirit and cohesion, they can also wield considerable power over individual property rights. Typically, when someone purchases a home within an HOA-governed area, they agree to adhere to its regulations. These bylaws can cover everything from the color of paint on houses to yard maintenance standards. In theory, this ensures that neighborhoods remain appealing and well-kept. However, the enforcement of these rules can lead to significant disputes and tensions, especially when residents feel overregulated or unfairly targeted. For me, the concept of an HOA was abstract until it intruded into my life with bulldozers on my land. I had never opted into any association. My farm sat on a plot separate from those governed by such regulations. Yet, there I was, facing accusations from an entity I had never agreed to be part of. The realization that an HOA could assert authority over my property simply because my land bordered their jurisdiction was nothing short of infuriating. One key aspect of HOAs is their ability to impose fees and penalties for perceived violations. Homeowners often find themselves subjected to fines for seemingly minor infractions, like gardening too freely or choosing not to trim hedges precisely according to HOA standards. These fees can accumulate quickly, leading some individuals into financial distress if they resist compliance. In extreme cases, persistent refusal to adhere to HOA demands can result in legal action against homeowners. Another troubling feature is how complaints can be lodged anonymously by fellow residents or members of the association. This anonymity sometimes fuels hostility within communities as neighbors fear retribution for expressing differing opinions about how properties should be maintained. What should ideally foster camaraderie can instead become a breeding ground for resentment and conflict. In my case, it appeared that complaints about nuisances from nearby homes had been sufficient trigger points for the HOA's actions against my farm. According to their narrative, my lifestyle choices like allowing chickens to roam free were disruptive rather than enriching. This stark difference in perspective underscored a fundamental misunderstanding about rural living versus suburban ideals. What I saw as vibrant life in harmony with nature was viewed through a lens of conformity by others. Moreover, it's critical to recognize how HOAs often operate without sufficient oversight. Their boards are typically made up of local residents who may not have experience in governance or legal matters, but possess enough influence within their community circle. Decisions made by these boards can sometimes reflect personal biases rather than fair assessments based on established guidelines. With all this in mind, I began contemplating not just my own plight, but the broader implications of such governance structure. The situation reminded me that while HOAs aim for order and uniformity, they often do so at the expense of individual liberties, the very freedoms that allow us all to pursue our unique visions for our lives and property. Understanding these dynamics prepared me mentally for the fight ahead. If I were going to contest the bulldozing operation taking place on my land, I needed clear arguments against the legitimacy of this HOA's authority over me, a non-member with deep ties both emotionally and physically to my land. The struggle would extend beyond personal loss. It would challenge a system that many unknowingly navigate without fully recognizing its implication. As I stood helplessly on my land, watching the construction vehicles rumble toward my cherished farm, the full impact of the HOA's claims began to sink in. Their assertion that I was violating bylaws felt like an accusation thrown like a stone, one that demanded immediate response. But what exactly were these violations they spoke of? My mind raced as I tried to comprehend the basis of their actions against me. The HOA had cited complaints from neighbors who deemed my lifestyle characterized by a small-scale farm with free-roaming chickens and a tendency for wildflowers to bloom wherever they pleased, unacceptable. To them, these elements which brought life and vibrancy to my property were nuisance. One complaint alleged that my chickens created noise and unsightly messes, while another referred to my untrimmed flower beds as an eyesore. It baffled me how anyone could view the joyful chaos of my farm as a problem. Nature in its playful form was being criminalized for not conforming to rigid standards. Realizing how subjective these claims were unsettled me further. The bylaws supposedly governing my land were likely created with suburban homes in mind, emphasizing uniformity and control, something that could hardly be applied to a rural setting. I had never signed any agreement acknowledging those bylaws or agreeing to adhere to their constraint. It felt absurd that an HOA could dictate terms over a property that had its own distinct life and character, separated by mere boundaries. In order to clarify the situation, I requested a copy of the HOA's bylaws from the representative overseeing the bulldozing operation. As I scanned through the documents provided, I was astonished at how many regulations seemed tailored for cookie-cutter developments, a world apart from the organic growth of my farm. Rules about fence height, landscaping requirements, and even pet ownership seemed woefully inadequate for differentiating between suburban living and rural farming practices. What struck me the most was the lack of provisions addressing properties that fell outside typical residential classifications. My farm was not merely a plot of land, it was a living ecosystem designed for sustainability and biodiversity. The HOA's bylaws seemed divorced from the reality of agricultural life, indicative of a community seeking to impose order at any cost, regardless of individual circumstances. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about enforcing rules, but rather a reflection of attitudes toward rural lifestyles. The HOA's rigid perspective failed to recognize that farms require flexibility, a trait integral to nurturing crops and livestock. The dynamic nature of farming means embracing imperfections, allowing for natural growth instead of forcing everything into neat little boxes. Undeterred by their claims and motivated by an increasing sense of injustice, I began gathering evidence supporting my case. I documented the vibrant ecosystems flourishing on my property, the beneficial insects pollinating flowers, the colorful birds nesting in nearby trees, and the healthy soil rich with nutrients necessary for growth. This was not merely an aesthetic choice, it represented a holistic approach to sustainable living that went against the grain of conformity espoused by the HOA. As I prepared to confront this unjust invasion of my space, it became clear that I needed more than just personal anecdotes. I needed allies who understood the fundamental differences between neighborhoods and farmlands. With each passing moment, it became a mission not solely focused on saving my property, but also about challenging an unjust system that enforced its will without context or consideration. The reality was dawning on me. Fighting these claims might just open up a broader dialogue about what it means to live in harmony with both nature and community standards, ones that respect personal liberties, while fostering genuine appreciation for diverse lifestyle. The path ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but I felt an undeniable sense of determination as I prepared to stand up for what was rightfully mine. As I grappled with the HOA's encroachment on my farm, I began to reflect deeply on my relationship with this association, one that on the surface seemed entirely non-existent. I had never signed any documents agreeing to their bylaws or paid any dues. My farm had always been independent and separate from the surrounding neighborhoods governed by the HOA. Yet here they were, wielding power over my land as if it were theirs to control. This realization ignited a profound sense of injustice within me. How could an organization claiming to represent community interests exert authority over someone who had no direct ties to them? It felt like an imposition of an alien legal structure onto a space that was not only mine, but also alive with the rhythms of nature and farming life. This sense of violation became clearer as I delved into the nuances of what HOAs truly represent and how they often operate without regard for those outside their jurisdiction. The more I researched, the more it became evident that many residents within HOA-controlled areas may not fully understand the extent of their own agreements, how easily they can become entangled in a web of rules that dictate almost every aspect of their life. For homeowners, compliance may seem non-negotiable, but for me, a non-member, the idea that an HOA could impose its regulations felt like an affront to individual rights. It underscored a disturbing reality. Even those not party to these agreements could become victims of their unchecked power. I thought about the neighbors who had lodged complaints against me, people living a mere stone's throw away, yet seemingly worlds apart in their conception of land use. What drove them to view my chickens and wildflowers as nuisances? Was it fear of chaos disrupting the order they craved, or was it a misunderstanding of rural life itself? Perhaps their complaints stemmed from a desire for conformity in a world that has increasingly valued uniformity over individual. In one considered moment, I wondered whether there was an opportunity for dialogue between us, a chance to bridge this divide between rural authenticity and suburban expectation. While my lifestyle was grounded in sustainability and connection to nature, theirs sought predictable aesthetics, aimed at boosting property value. Despite feeling overwhelmed by frustration toward both my neighbors and the HOA's unwavering stance, I recognized that understanding others' perspectives might be pivotal in finding common ground. I envisioned reaching out to those neighbors who felt compelled enough to complain about my way of life, perhaps inviting them onto my land for a conversation, showing them how free-roaming chickens contribute to pest control or how wildflowers attract beneficial insects might foster appreciation instead of resentment. After all, education can be a powerful tool against ignorance and misconceptions. However, even as I contemplated these possibilities, I felt the urgency of addressing the immediate threat posed by bulldozers poised to destroy parts of my sanctuary. At its core, this confrontation wasn't merely about property rights. It represented broader principles concerning autonomy and respect for diverse lifestyles within our communities. Empowered by this newfound perspective on relationships between myself and both the HOA and surrounding residents, I resolved not just to defend my land, but also potentially reshape how we interact with one another in our shared environment. By standing firm against unjust actions while seeking understanding among neighbors, perhaps I could ignite conversations about embracing diversity rather than enforcing conformity. As I prepared myself for what lay ahead, both in terms of legal battles and community discussions, I realized fighting against these claims had transformed into something larger than a personal struggle. It was an opportunity to advocate for awareness around agricultural practices versus suburban norms in a world where balance is essential. The fight was not just about saving my farm, it became about fostering dialogue that acknowledged our differences while finding ways to coexist harmoniously within our evolving landscapes. As I stood on the verge of losing my cherished sanctuary, considerations of the legal framework surrounding homeowners associations, HOAs, occupied my thoughts with a blend of anxiety and determination. I was acutely aware that this battle was not merely about personal grievances. It was intricately woven into a complex tapestry of laws and rights governing property ownership in America. The more I learned, the clearer it became that understanding these legal principles would be crucial in defending my land. First and foremost, it was essential to comprehend the nature of HOA authority. Typically, when residents choose to live in an HOA-governed area, they sign agreements accepting the rules laid out in the association's bylaws. These bylaws often grant HOAs significant control over property management, including the ability to impose fines, enforce compliance through legal action, and dictate how properties are maintained. However, what struck me as particularly troubling was that these powers were being wielded against someone who had never consented to such governance. The notion that an HOA could assert jurisdiction over my farm felt like an affront to basic property rights, particularly since I had no contractual obligation or agreement with them. Numerous legal precedents exist that protect individual rights against unwanted encroachments by HOAs. They cannot simply extend their authority beyond their designated boundaries. I began to formulate a plan, grounded in the concept of challenging their claims based on jurisdictional limit. I reached out to legal experts familiar with HOA law to gather insights into my situation. One attorney explained that while HOAs can enforce rules within their jurisdiction, there should be clear boundaries governing those powers. The fact that my property lay outside their official reach meant that any actions taken against me could very well be unlawful. This revelation filled me with a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps there was a viable path forward. Simultaneously, I sought to document evidence demonstrating the uniqueness of my farm. It was imperative to illustrate that this land was not simply an extension of suburban expectations, but rather an embodiment of rural life, a living ecosystem depending on flexibility and natural process. Armed with photographs showcasing flourishing plants, vibrant wildlife, and evidence of sustainable practices, I prepared to present my case both legally and publicly. However, I also knew that addressing the legalities alone would not suffice. Engaging in community discourse remained essential. The neighbors who had expressed discontent might not fully understand the implications of HOA enforcement or its impact on diverse lifestyle. Therefore, I decided it was time for outreach, an educational campaign aimed at elucidating the significance of sustaining agricultural practices alongside suburban living. Planning community meetings became a priority. I envisioned gatherings where both supporters of HOA regulations and critics could come together for open discussion. By inviting local experts to speak about agricultural sustainability and property rights, I hope to foster understanding among residents initially standing against me. After all, many may have been unaware of how rigid adherence to bylaws could stifle creativity and diversity in land use. As I navigated this complex landscape of law and community relations, it became evident that my fight transcended my individual circumstance. It reflected broader issues regarding the rights of property owners versus the authority granted to HOAs, a dialogue necessary not just for me, but also for others who might find themselves in similar predicaments in the future. Preparing for potential legal battles became intertwined with advocating for equitable treatment and respect for varied lifestyles within our communities. The realization dawned upon me: This struggle could pave the way toward establishing frameworks where diverse forms of land use are embraced rather than suppressed, a dialogue advocating for balance between community standards and individual freedoms. With each passing day, I grew increasingly resolute in my mission, not only defending my farm but also championing a cause larger than myself, ensuring every individual enjoys autonomy over their own land, while fostering appreciation for differing ways of life within our neighborhoods. As I stood amidst the chaos of bulldozers looming on my farm, emotions surged within me like a tempest. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming, invoking deep feelings of loss and impending despair. This was not merely land, it was my sanctuary, an extension of my spirit, cultivated carefully and lovingly over years. The thought that it could be destroyed because of some purported bylaw violations felt like a violation of my very identity. That morning seemed surreal, the sun shining brightly as if mocking the turmoil in my heart. Each roar of the machinery felt like a blow, ripping apart not just plants but memories as well. I recalled the laughter of family gatherings around the picnic table under the old oak tree, the vibrant flowers I had planted each spring, and even the simple joy found in tending to my chickens and watching their antics. All of this, the essence of my day-to-day life, seemed poised to vanish under the wheels of a merciless machine fueled by bureaucratic indifference. The emotional weight intensified as I considered the rationale behind the HOA's action. The neighbors who had lodged complaints could hardly grasp the love and labor poured into every inch of this farm. To label my humble lifestyle as a nuisance felt like a personal attack against all I believed in: sustainable living, connection to nature, and the celebration of diversity in how one can inhabit land. I could not fathom how they could detach themselves from such simple joys and view rural vibrancy as something undesirable. A simmering anger soon began to replace the initial shock. It crystallized into a resolve, not just to protect my land, but also to stand up against a system that allowed an HOA to dictate how someone should live based solely on rigid guidelines. Why should conformity reign supreme? My heart burned with indignation at the thought that rules designed to uphold community aesthetics could extinguish the essence of individual expression woven so deeply into this fabric of life I'd created. In this tumultuous moment, I also found frustration directed toward myself. Why hadn't I anticipated that someone might oppose my peaceful livelihood? How had I let myself believe that my choices would go unchallenged? As self-doubt crept in, I reminded myself that I had nurtured this farm with good intentions and hard work, believing it was a refuge in all its untamed glory. While internal struggles raged, external challenges loomed larger still. The prospect of legal battles weighed heavily on me, stirring anxiety about what it might take to defend my right to exist here unburdened by unwarranted judgment. Each thought of the impending conflict stirred apprehension, not just for myself but for all those who had fought similar battles without support or recognition. Yet as despair intermingled with determination, a new clarity emerged. This fight was about more than saving my property. It represented a broader struggle for autonomy against imposed regulation. Each bulldozer became symbolic, not only of the threat to my land, but also of resistance against a cultural tendency toward uniformity at the expense of diversity. With renewed purpose flickering inside me, I embraced both anger and sorrow as motivation to rise above my circumstances. My mission shifted from mere self-preservation to advocating for awareness around these issues, faced by countless others entangled in oppressive governance structure. This sense of purpose transformed my emotional turmoil into motivation for change, a shift from victimhood to empowerment. In that chaotic moment filled with uncertainty and pain, I discovered resilience beneath sorrow, an urge to stand firm not only for my farm but for all forms of life that dared to thrive outside conventional norms. Hope began to take root amid the wreckage daubed across my once peaceful fields, a hope that perhaps I could challenge not only the authority claiming ownership over my land, but also ignite conversations about embracing varied lifestyle choices amidst our communities. This battle would become emblematic, not just for me, but for anyone yearning to maintain their way of living amid the constraints imposed by narrow definitions of what was considered acceptable within our worlds. As the bulldozers continued their relentless approach, something unexpected began to unfold in my community. Word had spread about the threat to my farm, and soon neighbors, friends, and even strangers began to rally around me. I was taken aback by their support. The warmth of solidarity was a striking contrast to the cold, impersonal nature of the HOA's actions. Despite apprehensions stemming from complaints against my lifestyle, many residents were eager to lend a helping hand. At first, it started with kind gestures, a neighbor bringing over a home-cooked meal, and another offering to help craft flyers for an awareness campaign. However, as I shared my story, the support morphed into something larger. People began asking how they could formally assist me in pushing back against the HOA's claims. A local farmer offered his knowledge, educating me on past battles fought against similar agencies that sought to impose rigid regulations on land use. His first-hand accounts of resilience infused me with tactics I could employ in my defense. With each conversation, it became clear that this incident resonated far beyond personal grievances. It tapped into a profound desire for freedom. Freedom to live authentically and embrace diverse lifestyles without undue interference. Inspired by this realization, I organized a community meeting at a local park gazebo. As flyers circulated inviting people to join in discussing HOA governance and community rights, an air of anticipation hung thick in the air. On the day of the meeting, I was overwhelmed by the turnout. Neighbors filled the benches and stood along the grassy edges, eager to engage in a dialogue about issues that affected us all. People spoke passionately about their own experiences, how they had been stifled by HOA regulations, or felt pressured to alter their lives to fit narrow definitions of acceptable living. The depth of shared understanding ignited a collective determination among us. We were not just protectors of my farm, but advocates for everyone's rights within our diverse community. Stories flowed like an unbroken current as attendees exchanged ideas on how to navigate these challenges together. Some offered legal contacts who could provide pro bono assistance, while others brainstormed solutions for raising awareness about my situation and HO governance more generally. Ideas ranged from petitions against stringent regulations to organizing peaceful demonstrations, advocating for recognizing agricultural rights alongside residential norms. A pivotal moment emerged when we discussed establishing a task force dedicated not only to assisting in my specific fight, but also committed to actively scrutinizing how our community's governance impacted residents. This coalition represented a new beginning in our neighborhood, a call for inclusive conversations bridging the gaps between rural and suburban perspectives. As days rolled into weeks and community support grew stronger, so did my resolve. Armed with a coalition poised to confront unjust systems of authority, I felt emboldened. The battle extended beyond individual conflicts. It became emblematic of a larger movement within our communities toward preserving identity while fostering understanding amongst divergent lifestyles. Together, we drafted letters to send to local media outlets, personal accounts highlighting how HOAs contribute significantly toward diminishing individuality and instilling fear among residents unwilling or unable to conform strictly. By sharing these narratives widely, we aimed not just for sympathy but also strategic pressure on HOA boards that could receive public scrutiny. Moments of joy punctuated this period of struggle. We celebrated small victories, including positive messages from fellow residents standing with me. Each word of encouragement helped transform fear into fuel that fortified our collective mission. I vividly recall one late afternoon when I received a call from an editor at a regional publication, willing to feature our story prominently within its pages. As excitement coursed through my veins, it became clear. No matter what happened with my land, our grassroots movement signified the potential for necessary change. Not just within our little enclave, but as part of a larger conversation about individual rights and coexistence amid diversity throughout every neighborhood facing similar conflicts with governing organizations. Our united front had transformed not only perceptions, but also offered hope, a tangible promise that we could stand together against systems designed to stifle individuality while dismantling norms imposed by small bureaucracies bent on eliminating anything deemed disorderly. The power of community support began overshadowing feelings of isolation felt amidst legal threats. New connections flourished as neighbors fought shoulder to shoulder for each other's rights, a powerful testimony illustrating what happens when folks refuse compliance and choose instead solidarity in pursuit of freedom. As the community rallied around my cause, it became increasingly clear that we needed to amplify our message beyond the boundaries of our neighborhood. The support I received was heartfelt, but to create real change, we needed to reach a broader audience, one that could influence perceptions and potentially sway those in power. That's when I decided to harness the media to bring attention to the injustices surrounding my farm and the broader implications of HOA governance. I began crafting a press release that detailed not only my situation but also the larger issues at play with HOAs infringing on individual rights. I wrote about how my farm had become a target due to complaints rooted in misunderstanding rather than genuine grievances. I focused on how this incident was part of a national trend where homeowners associations exerted overreaching authority, often stifling uniqueness and diversity in living arrangement. My goal was to articulate how personal freedoms were at stake, not just for me but for many others who might face similar challenges in silence. With the press release in hand, I reached out to local news outlets, pitching my story as not just an isolated incident, but a representation of a growing tension between community regulations and individual expression. To my pleasant surprise, several reporters expressed interest. They understood that this story had the potential to resonate with many people facing similar struggles across different parts of the country. The first article appeared in our local newspaper within days, detailing the struggle between my fight against the HOA and my commitment to maintaining a vibrant rural lifestyle. It captured not only my heartbreak over losing my land, but also showcased the community's support rallying behind me. The phone calls began pouring in from neighboring towns. People reached out offering solidarity and sharing their own experiences of grappling with HOA policies that had encroached on their lives. As media coverage expanded, social media played a pivotal role in heightening awareness. Friends and supporters helped share articles across platforms, creating hashtags that drew attention from those who had never heard of our plight before. Online discussions sparked among residents from various backgrounds, some advocating for more transparent HOA governance, while others shared tips on organizing grassroots movements against oppressive systems. Public interest blossomed like wildflowers after rain. Suddenly, what felt like an uphill battle began garnering traction among broader circles. Soon after, popular blogs dedicated to rural living picked up the narrative, showcasing how my story fit into larger conversations about sustainability versus conformity in residential settings. One particularly impactful moment came when an influential local radio host invited me onto their show for an interview, a platform I never anticipated reaching. As I spoke candidly about my journey, emotions spilled forth. Tales of community support, resilience against bureaucratic oppression, and shared dreams for diverse lifestyles flourished under varying landscapes. The host's enthusiasm helped inspire listeners who called in with messages of encouragement supporting not only my battle but also advocacy for reconsidering HOA policies altogether. The culmination of these efforts manifested during a town hall meeting scheduled soon after, where both supporters and skeptics would discuss HOA regulations openly alongside passionate advocates for individual rights like myself. Attendees included not just locals but representatives from nearby communities who had traveled to voice their own experiences with similar struggles. It felt as though we were partaking in something much bigger than ourselves. With every article written and broadcast aired, a cycle began that reinforced community bonds while igniting dialogues about what it truly meant to live harmoniously together amidst differing opinions about land use and lifestyle choices. The media coverage had succeeded beyond expectations. It shone a light on our movement while galvanizing support from unexpected corners far outside our immediate vicinity. As awareness grew, so did hopefulness. Not just around saving my farm, but across neighborhoods where voices long silenced found strength anew through solidarity, forged by that very struggle against oversight agencies, intent on imposing conformity upon diverse identities. Our mission evolved beyond mere preservation. It transformed into championing freedom itself. The right for everyone to carve their path authentically without fear or favoritism dictated by narrow definitions imposed by bureaucracies. In reflecting upon this remarkable journey marked by adversity turned opportunity, I felt immense gratitude toward all those who stood firm alongside me, proving loud protests could rise above quiet constriction and inspire action, grounded in shared aspirations for better living conditions, marked by respect rather than regimes, seeking uniformity at the cost of individuality. In the aftermath of the bulldozing incident, my resolve to fight for my farm transformed into a multifaceted strategy aimed at reclaiming not just my land, but also the rights of others who felt marginalized by HOA. The emotional toll was heavy, but it fueled my determination to take actionable steps forward. I recognized that this was not just about my situation, it was about reshaping how our community understood governance and individual rights. The first step I took was to gather all relevant documentation regarding my property and the HOA's bylaws. This included any communications I had received from the HOA, photographs of my farm, and records of neighbor complaints. I meticulously compiled evidence that supported my stance, that my land usage did not violate any laws but rather represented a different lifestyle choice. This groundwork would be crucial for both legal proceedings and community discussion. With legal counsel now actively engaged, we began preparing a formal challenge against the HOA's claims. Our arguments centered on the lack of jurisdiction over my property, given that I had never consented to their regulations or membership. My attorney highlighted precedents in which courts ruled in favor of property owners facing similar situations. Armed with this knowledge, I felt empowered. There was a tangible path forward. As I navigated these legal complexities, it became clear that community education remained paramount. Many residents were unaware of their rights regarding HOA governance, and I sought to change that through workshops and informational sessions. I organized gatherings where local experts, lawyers specialized in property rights, activists experienced in community organization, and even former HOA board members shared insights on navigating these often labyrinthine structures. These sessions not only empowered attendees but also solidified a shared understanding of our collective challenges. As grassroots efforts gained momentum, we established a coalition called Voice for Freedom, dedicated to advocating for personal liberties against oppressive regulations imposed by HOA. This coalition served as a platform for residents to voice concerns, share experiences, and strategize together on how to confront the issues effectively. We created a website featuring resources such as template letters for addressing complaints to HOAs, guidelines for organizing community meetings, and success stories from individuals who had previously fought back against similar injustice. Recognizing the power of public discourse, we also developed a petition aimed at demanding greater transparency from HOAs regarding their operations and decision-making process. The response was astonishing. Signatures poured in from not only our community but neighboring towns as well, demonstrating solidarity among those who had faced similar struggles. Meanwhile, as my media coverage continued to spread awareness, opportunities arose to speak publicly in various forums. Local radio shows sought me out for interviews where I could articulate our mission and galvanize wider support. Each discussion further amplified our message, not only about protecting my farm, but also advocating for a broader dialogue surrounding personal freedoms within residential communities. Social media played an instrumental role during this period. Supporters created pages dedicated to sharing news about our coalition's activities, while hosting online discussions about HOA's impacts on diverse lifestyles. These platforms allowed people from across the state, and even beyond, to connect over shared experiences and rally together for change. The turning point came during a town hall meeting organized to discuss proposed changes in HOA regulations, an event that promised both tension and opportunity. Community members flooded the room, voices raised in passionate discussion about the need for reform. It was clear that awareness had blossomed. People were no longer content to accept decisions made behind closed doors without accountability. The energy in that room felt electric, a palpable sense of unity stemming from a shared resolve. In those moments, as speakers took turns sharing stories of resilience and hope, I understood that every step taken post-incident had begun weaving together a fabric of community strength. We were transforming fear into empowerment and pushing back against systems designed to enforce conformity at the expense of individuality. Together, we embraced the possibility of change, not just for myself, but as champions advocating for rights that should belong to everyone willing to carve out their own definition of home and community amidst varied lifestyle. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but with an unwavering network of support beside me, Each step was infused with purpose, a collective mission toward justice and recognition flourishing in every corner as we forged ahead into uncharted territory together. As I reflect on the journey from the initial shock of losing my cherished farm to becoming an advocate for individual rights, the experience has cemented my belief in the power of community and the importance of standing up for what is just. The struggle against the HOA was not just a personal battle, but a rallying cry for many who feel marginalized by rigid regulations that seek to dictate how we live our lives. As we forged ahead together, it became clear that this fight transcended my own circumstances. It was about asserting our collective right to choose our paths freely. The journey has taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, advocacy, and the importance of amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. By mobilizing community support and harnessing media attention, we demonstrated that united voices can challenge the status quo and demand accountability from those in power. The transformation I witnessed in myself and those around me was profound. We evolved from passive recipients of governance to active participants in shaping our environment. Now, as I stand at this crossroads, I see an opportunity for broader change, not just within my community but across neighborhoods facing similar challenges. This moment calls for a concerted effort to engage others who may be suffering under the weight of oppressive HOA regulations or other governing bodies that impose conformity at the expense of individuality. It is time to come together, share our stories, and build a movement that champions diversity and personal freedom. I urge anyone encountering similar situations, whether you are a homeowner struggling against HOA overreach or someone fighting for sustainable practices in your community, to take action. Start by gathering information about your rights. Educate yourself on local laws regarding homeowners associations and property ownership. Knowledge is power, and understanding your legal standing can equip you with the tools necessary to challenge unjust practice. Consider forming or joining local coalitions focused on advocating for individual rights. Together, you can create platforms to amplify your voices, organizing workshops, community meetings, and discussions with experts who can provide guidance on navigating legal complexity. The strength of a united community cannot be underestimated. When people come together to share their experiences and insights, it fosters an environment ripe for change. Engage with local media outlets to share your story and raise awareness about your cause. Media coverage can draw significant attention to issues that might otherwise remain obscured, shining a light on the need for transparency and reform within governance structure. Use social media to connect with others who resonate with your fight. Create hashtags that encapsulate your mission and encourage dialogue among like-minded individuals. Finally, don't shy away from reaching out to civic leaders or elected representatives. Advocate for policy changes that promote fair treatment and protect individual freedoms against arbitrary regulations imposed by HOAs or similar entities. Every conversation matters. Every voice counts. In conclusion, let my journey serve as both a reminder and a rallying call. We have the power to reclaim our narratives, reshape our communities, and advocate for rights fundamental to our identity as individuals. We must not allow bureaucratic structures to dictate how we live, love, and thrive. The road ahead may be challenging, but it is paved with possibilities. Possibilities where each of us can carve out spaces that honor our uniqueness while embracing diversity. Together, we can foster environments where everyone feels empowered to pursue their visions of home without fear or oppression. Let's unite in this critical mission, championing freedom not just for ourselves but for future generations who will inherit the communities we shape today. Let's take action now, because every effort counts in creating a world where individuality is celebrated rather than suppressed.